Daily Words of God. Believing in fate is no substitute for a knowledge of the Creator's sovereignty. After being a follower of God for so many years, is there a substantial difference between your knowledge of fate and that of the worldly people? Have you truly understood the predestination of the Creator and truly come to know the Creator's sovereignty? Some people have a profound, deeply felt understanding of the phrase, "That's fate," yet they do not in the least bit believe in God's sovereignty, do not believe that a human fate is arranged and orchestrated by God, and are unwilling to submit to the sovereignty of God. Such people are as if adrift on the ocean, tossed by the waves, floating with the current, with no choice but to wait passively and resign themselves to fate. Yet, they do not recognize that human fate is subject to God's sovereignty. They cannot come to know God's sovereignty on their own initiative and thereby achieve knowledge of God's authority, submit to God's orchestrations and arrangements, stop resisting fate, and live under God's care, protection, and guidance. In other words, accepting fate is not the same thing as submitting to the Creator's sovereignty. Belief in fate does not mean that one accepts, recognizes, and knows the Creator's sovereignty. Belief in fate is just recognition of this fact and this outer phenomenon, which is different from knowing how the Creator rules humanity's fate, from recognizing that the Creator is the source of dominion over the fates of all things, and even more, from submitting to the Creator's orchestrations and arrangements for humanity's fate. If a person only believes in fate, even feels deeply about it, but is not thereby able to know, recognize, submit to, and accept the Creator's sovereignty over the fate of humanity, then his or her life will nonetheless be a tragedy, a life lived in vain, a void. He or she will still be unable to become subject to the Creator's dominion, to become a created human being in the truest sense of the phrase, and enjoy the Creator's approval. A person who truly knows and experiences the Creator's sovereignty should be in an active, not passive or helpless state, while at the same time accepting that all things are fated. He or she should possess an accurate definition of life and fate, that every life is subject to the Creator's sovereignty. When one looks back upon the road one has walked, when one recollects every phase of one's journey, one sees that at every step, whether one's road was arduous or smooth, God was guiding one's path, planning it out. It was God's meticulous arrangements, His careful planning, that led one unknowingly to today. To be able to accept the Creator's sovereignty, to receive His salvation, what great fortune that is. If a person's attitude toward fate is passive, it proves that he or she is resisting everything that God has arranged for him or her, that he or she does not have a submissive attitude. If one's attitude toward God's sovereignty over human fate is active, then when one looks back upon one's journey, when one truly comes to grips with God's sovereignty, one will more earnestly desire to submit to everything that God has arranged, will have more of the determination and confidence to let God orchestrate one's fate, to stop rebelling against God. For one sees that when one does not comprehend fate, when one does not understand God's sovereignty, when one gropes forward willfully, staggering and tottering, through the fog, the journey is too difficult, too heartbreaking. So when people recognize God's sovereignty over human fate, the smart ones choose to know it and accept it, to bid farewell to the painful days when they tried to build a good life with their own two hands, instead of continuing to struggle against fate and pursue their so-called life goals in their own manner. When one has no God, when one cannot see Him, when one cannot clearly recognize God's sovereignty, every day is meaningless, worthless, miserable. Wherever one is, whatever one's job is, one's means of living and the pursuit of one's goals bring one nothing but endless heartbreak and irrelievable suffering, such that one cannot bear to look back. Only when one accepts the Creator's sovereignty, submits to His orchestrations and arrangements, and seeks true human life, will one gradually break free from all heartbreak and suffering, shake off all the emptiness of life.